Hello, welcome everyone. So I think we're about to get started here in just a minute. So we'd love if everyone could get settled. Feel free to get some water or snacks or whatever you need, and we'll kick it off. I'm Wade Islin. I'm a senior analyst with Economist Impact. So I sit within research consulting arm, think tank essentially of Economist Impact, which is part of the Economist group. And it's my pleasure to be here today with all of you and excited to discuss data. And before we kick off, I'll hand over to Andy Gorman from IBM to give some opening remarks.
Thanks, Wade. Hi, everyone. All right, hi, everyone. My name is Andy Gorman. I live here in Charlotte. I have for 16 years. I'm with IBM, been with them for over 25 years, believe it or not. I think I'm a unicorn in the industry staying with one company so long. But super excited to be here with you today. I've done a bunch of different jobs at IBM, but the last 3 years, I've been running an organization called Customer Success. We are focused on helping and ensuring our customers are successfully adopting our software solutions. I started out for the first 2 years running the financial services market. In the last year, I have an oversight of all of Americas. We have about 600 CSMs across the Americas, and about 100 of them are focused on data and AI. So obviously, this is really important to us, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. I'm actually filling in for a peer of mine who was from the Data and AI product management team and had to run to Prague because we bought a company called Manta last week, responsible for data lineage, and which is obviously being an important part of our watsonx strategy and helping customers adopt Gen AI and establish that trust and transparency you need to get around AI. So excited to be here with you today, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from you. I originally was coming here to learn, but I'm happy to provide my thoughts on data and AI and everything that you're working on today. Thanks, Wade.
Sure. So first, I want to thank IBM for sponsoring this event and making it possible. Thank you all again for being here today and participating, and thank all of the speakers who will be taking part in our sessions. There'll also be two of our sessions will be audience focused. Will be an opportunity for everyone here to largely discuss amongst yourselves, debate a bit. I also just want to note that this is being live streamed and recorded as well. So just for your awareness that others are here watching online also. So whatever you say in the room during some of those discussions also is available to those folk as well, so you know. And then we would encourage everyone also to please stay after the forum is over. We do have a drinks reception, and would encourage everyone to come join, network, chat, and enjoy yourselves. But thank you again for being here. And we'll get started with our first panel. So you can stay on stage.
All right, I will.
And then I'd like to welcome up the rest of our panelists here. Thank you.
Anywhere?
Yeah.
My head doesn't even fit in the box.
I gotta say, it was very strange seeing my face staring at me as I was saying giant on the screen.
So do you mind doing a brief round of introductions, and we'll kick off?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. My name's Mark Carson. I'm a managing director for Protiviti. We're a $2.5 billion, 8,000 person management consulting firm. And my role is I run our data and analytics strategy business around the world.
I am Jenny Rarig. I am the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Novant Health, which is a super regional, fully integrated health system in the Southeast. Anything else? That's it. That's who I am. That's what I do.
And you already met me.
Yes. So in this panel, we'll be focused on leaders versus laggards. So it says what separates a pioneering firm from a lagging firm. And to kick off, what makes a leading firm in 2023 when it comes to data and analytics?
I think it's investment. I think it's investment in people, process, technology. And I think it's the way to get the investment is to help your executive team understand the value that comes from data and analytics, or that's possible from data and analytics.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about this at lunch earlier. There's a Venn diagram, right, of people who really understand how to go make money, save money, reduce risk, leave the world a better place for the business, right? Call those the functional people if you want, right? And then there's the heavy technical enablement side, right? And data kind of lives in that Venn diagram in the middle. I think it's, that healthy leading data teams, cross into both of those areas and can bridge that gap, and don't use, oh, you don't understand data as a crutch, right? It's, you hear data literacy and these terms all the time. Like you got on LinkedIn, oh, they're, get your business more data literate, get more business literate too, right? So you got to meet in that middle.
Yeah. And I think it's about taking a balanced approach. Certainly investing is critical, but you have to balance that with continuously returning back to the business results and tying that into the value that your stakeholders are going to care about. As we see an expansion of Gen AI, what have you, I think we talk about by 2025, 30% of those workloads are going to be Gen AI, but 70% of them are still your traditional things, right? So as we're exploring this new technology and inviting new hires to join the team because we've got these exciting things going on, you got to balance that with all the other important things that you've been delivering over the last 15, 20 years. So I think that's what's going to separate us, taking that balanced approach.
And how would you say that a successful organization does that in practice, right? So link their data and analytics workflows to their business needs and business outcomes?
Well, it's about having rigor, right? So I think when you launch a new initiative, there can be a period of time that is a bit of a playground, but there have to be kind of regular checkpoints of tying back into, okay, great, you can summarize a novel really quickly, right? But how is that going to help our shareholders get greater return, or how are we reducing risk, or making the world a better place, like you said. So it's having that rigor and that constant methodology around it to make sure things don't run away.
One of the things that we've done is we've actually organized our team into outcome delivery teams that are focused on the value streams within our organization. And we work really closely with those business stakeholders on what their outcomes are. And we use an iterative approach to deliver on those, which proves value every 2 weeks or however long your sprints are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so your organizational function is about what are you delivering, not, oh, you're the team with this technology.
Not
You're
order
the team with that
takers,
right.
not
Right.
order takers, strategic partners.
Right.
I just picked up a great piece of Chatham House Rules. I won't call this person out from earlier, but how do we do this? We do it quietly, which I loved.
That's
like
right.
Leading innovation, don't overpromise, right? Go out there, hit your early adopters, show some strong benefits, and success breeds success from inertia, right? So you're always going to have legacy something that you're working with, and you're always going to have the shiny object, right? Don't overplay your hand on the shiny object.
So I would hope that no one here would put themselves in the laggard box, but I couldn't say. But if, what would be the advice you would give to a firm that may be lagging behind or may have large volumes of tech debt or may not be where they want to be? Like what are the the one or two first steps an organization should take to try and catch up or move from becoming a laggard to making their way towards becoming a leading firm?
So I think one of them is make sure, you're going to hear this a lot from all of us, but make sure you're tying your goals, challenges, and aspirations as a data organization, an analytics organization, to the goals, challenges, and aspirations of the business, right? They need to be, if you go, I'm a one-person hashtag, I'm trying to make this go viral, but hashtag data strategy is business strategy on LinkedIn. Please feel free to make it go global. But it really is. One enables the other, right? And you can't survive these days with one without the other. And it's high time that data and analytics leadership sits at the parents' table, right? And so being alongside the rest. So I think it's time to be bold, make those demands. There's plenty of examples in the market now of success, right? And there's tried and true paths that you can do to start making traction. But at first and foremost, you're going to have to get people to buy in and give some investment. And so you have to push for it.
I think there's a governance play as well. I mean, You can promise your stakeholders the world, but if your data is in poor shape, you're going to get garbage out. So the data governance, the data quality, that needs to be in place. Data stewardship. You have to have data availability. You can't have gaps in your data. So it's about building that foundation, and it's not an overnight thing. If you don't have it today, you need to start it today.
Yeah, we have an old saying at IBM in data and AI, and it might be cliche by now, but it's still true. You can't have AI without IA. You can't have it without information architecture. And so that means the data quality and the data governance and rich metadata that describes the data so you can democratize it and make it available. But you'll never be able to boil the ocean, right? You have to pick the small wins and do it quietly. And then, once you introduce that win, you can grow from there. But tech debt is something lots of large organizations struggle with, and you have to focus on. Hey, it's not just about moving to cloud; it's about reducing risk, extending support, lowering your costs, and if you're grounded in those values, then you can find a small project to launch that journey.
Yeah, and as you're realizing business value, right? Because that's the outcomes. Jenny speaks about that every time she talks about it, which I love. Is build into those initiatives you're doing is a demand to naturally retire things as you go, right? So not only what outcome have you had for your customer, but what outcome have you had for simplification of the organization, people, process, and technology? Yeah,
that product delivery methodology that's centered around outcomes is key for that, because you're right, it naturally lends itself to out with the old, replace with the new, and keep going.
So on the flip side then, what do you guys see as the common pitfalls or challenges that lead an organization to become a lagging firm, or that organizations are commonly falling into that create obstacles preventing them from becoming leaders?
Well, failing to invest would be one area, right? But it's not just about spending money. It has to be about spending smart money. But I think it probably repeats some of the things we said around focusing on the small areas and growing from there, right? And you have to kind of foster a culture of curiosity, which is not just about playing with the new technology, but doing it in smart ways in the right areas to return that value back to the business along the way.
Along with that culture is, I find that in some areas of Novant Health, we have people who are not accustomed to making data-driven decisions. And I think that fostering that type of an approach to how you use data as an organization and how you gain value from your organization is crucial. So that's also a cultural shift that, if not carried out properly, it's harder for you to align strategically with your business partners.
Yeah, and the one I see all the time is overpromise, right, and underdeliver. But equally to that is good work doesn't speak for itself. Like, you have to market the value. You have to market the great work you've done. You have to enable others to. You have to put it in other people's court to do something with what you've produced as well. Quick example, what I mean there is, let's say you cleaned up some customer data and some product data for a use case, right? And now you can market that actively back out to the organization, so that you don't have to be the creative person of how to use that data. You have to present that data back as an asset, where marketing might pick it up and say, I have a target marketing campaign that we've never tried because we didn't trust that data, and now we have it. The data team shouldn't know that, and they sure as heck shouldn't have to come up with that idea. They should be presenting back those assets that are available. So you got to brag on yourself. You just have to. And a lot of the wiring of the individuals in this room, including this guy, don't tend to have that as a natural disposition.
Well, and the further you get along in your maturity curve, your customers will do the bragging for you.
Exactly.
So I guess thinking about the internal dynamics of the organization, both when it comes to building those connections around, if we're thinking about internal use cases, say, building those connections internally around marketing, data work or analytics work that's been done, marketing data products, data democratization, building cross-functional networking for data and analytics products. How can one go about that successfully?
You guys are crushing it. you take that one.
Well, I think the first thing we wanted to do is try to get data out of silos, and in order to make that popular, you have to sort of make it seem like it's your customer's idea so that they think it's a good idea. And once you start selling them on that and you set yourself up in this outcome delivery team, that's what we call them, ODTs, outcome delivery teams, product delivery model, you literally get an outcome from your client. I want to increase patient conversion by 20% in 2024. Everything the data and analytics team does every 2 weeks on a sprint needs to see what moves the needle. If we start this type of a campaign and it moves the needle the wrong way or doesn't move at all, we're going to stop that. This one moves it a lot. We're going to do that more. So it's about pulling together all of those pieces, and then eventually your customers are like, oh, we can make decisions off of this. And so there is a learning curve. There are some areas of our business that are more willing to engage in that model than others. And so we're on this journey with them.
I think it's another great example. I mean, look, as you're building bridges with other organizations, I don't know that it's necessarily unique to the data and AI space. I mean, it's simply interpersonal and organizational behavior, right? Where you need to understand what your stakeholders are interested in, what's going to get them promoted, and then you need to find ways to deliver value to help them get promoted. I mean, which you can do with data.
They need you. You need them too, right? Symbiotic, right? Last thing you hear this, why do 70% of data science projects fail, right? Usually it's because somewhere in the middle, things are falling apart, right? So there's some swagger to it, right? If you're not getting what you need to ask for it, right? And you also need to give, right? And not be afraid to ask questions and build those relationships. But it is a symbiotic relationship, and celebrate it, even with all the differences in personalities and trying to get people's time and all that. But I don't want to sound patronizing, but that's just life. Like that's no matter what it is. To your point, right?
Right.
Got to work through those things.
Are there any particular technologies that here and now separate a leader from a laggard? And I'm particularly avoiding inserting Gen AI into that question because I don't want to presuppose that that's the answer, right? I mean, it may be entirely something else, regardless of Gen AI being top of mind. But what are those technologies or approaches that today, or looking ahead a year, are separating firms that are getting this right from firms that may or may not be?
Well, as tempting as it is, I won't simply plug Watson X. But no, I think what's critical is any technology that gives you the flexibility to fit for purpose, right? Where you can maximize that price performance ratio. So having options, or whether you're running on-prem or in the cloud, to meet various stakeholders' imperatives. I think those are the technologies that are going to be critical. It's about being open, right? Open source, the option of open source and open formats to avoid lock-in, and then being able to manage that cost, that price performance ratio.
It's the product mindset, right? We're all in this together from day one, right? I think that technology is an enabler, right? I sit in our technology consulting business, and I will say that till I have my foot in the grave, right? We are an enabler. A hammer looking for a nail is not the best approach from a technology standpoint. So it's really, I think it's a method and an idea of bringing people together early and often, and everybody having skin in the game together. And then the technology will bolt itself on as you go. And what differentiates Watson X from competitors, for example, right, are going to be nuanced things ultimately, especially as this all matures. right? And the only way to know those nuances to help you make those decisions is for all of you to think together, because everybody's got blind spots, right? But between all of you, hopefully those blind spots are reduced.
What does it look like to help an organization or ensure that an organization is managing an increasingly complex data landscape, data sprawl, an increasing number of stakeholders who all have a hand or want to be having a hand in the creation or use of data products, and navigating that environment? Are there any tips that you guys have or that come to mind, or any pitfalls there?
You guys are going to get so tired of me. I'm going to go back to governance, because I think that, the last thing you want to spend your organization's money on is a solution looking for a problem. Something that sounds really cool, but you roll it out and no one uses it. So, you need to have a really rigid framework, well, not rigid, but defined framework in place where you can take the ideas that come into the group. You can cluster them by the value that they add to the organization, the availability and cleanliness of the data, like all different factors that are important, to your outcomes, right? And then you can start to prioritize the work. And with that follows the data, so you don't have a bunch of unwanted data or data that you spent time mastering that nobody really uses. That governance framework is key to the success of kind of controlling the environment.
Yeah, I always put it as the analogy. I couldn't agree more, just to add to that, like just an analogy. You can have the best, like an American football reference, you can have the best skilled players in the world, but if your offensive line is crap, right, it's pretty hard for the quarterback to connect
That's right.
to receivers, right? Your offensive line, your foundations of disciplines of data management, as I like to summarize them as, and then governance is the process of holding people accountable for those disciplines of data management, hence its name. That is, enough said. It's so critical.
Yeah, so you have to ask yourself that question. Have I established a strategy, to get me from point A to point B over the next, period of time? And check in against that and establish that rigor around making sure you're building towards that strategy. Otherwise you'll run the risk of runaway projects and project sprawl and you'll lose control. You got to be rooted back in that strategy, and as we've said multiple times, well, I'm sure we'll say a few more times, that strategy has to be tied back to what is your business trying to achieve.
And if I might add, sorry, I don't want to leave what I said without this important nuance. That doesn't mean go out and define all the data domains of your organization and assign data stewards to every possible critical data element, and then 80% of those people you never talk to again for the next 2 years because only 20% of them are where the burning fires are in the business. Like those kinds of things are just classic mistakes, right? So it's about hard-earned, painful mistakes, but it's about building this out on the backs of business cases, coming full circle for the 11th time, right?
So I recognize that it's organizationally dependent, but you were talking, Andy, about organizational strategy. It needs to be business aligned. Who needs to be involved in setting those strategies, right? Like, who are the stakeholders that have to be in the room for that, or maybe don't have to be?
Well, data doesn't do much by itself, right? And why are we spending so much time in analyzing our data and organizing our data? It's to gain those insights out of the data and to, whether it's predictive or whether it's feeding into the new generative space, it has to, be grounded back in quality data. And so your stakeholders are going to be those who are, consumers of that data, right? So it's, treating it like a product, packaging it up, managing it from end to end, and then, tying back into those business stakeholders, whatever lines of businesses you might be working with.
I guess the question is, do all of those people need to be involved in setting a strategy, right? Or in ensuring there's business alignment, or is there a way to avoid having, totally herding cats?
So, yeah. Well, I don't think that they would necessarily be defining the strategy of how you're going to manipulate and modify your data and expose it out, right? But they will help you understand what they need, right, as a consumer of that data.
Yeah, establishing data and analytics strategies is the business I run. So I can tell you, from the key positions, there's two angles to take, right? The way I look at it is if you're trying to get that if you think you can get the buy-in from the top of the house, the people that ultimately own the outcomes of saving money, making money, reducing risk, leave the world a better place. If those people get it already, and a lot of them now do, right? You can start there and work your way through a method. I'll spray the details on for now. The inverse of that, though, is if you don't have that buy-in, go solve a data problem. Go solve a data quality problem for an area of the business that keeps getting beat up because their month-end reporting is not accurate. Go solve that and then brag about it. Have them brag about it, right? That, success breeds success. It breeds inertia, right? So you can come at it from a number of different angles depending on your particular circumstance, but it ain't going to sell itself. Data's not going to sell itself.
We typically include the business stakeholder and then our product leadership, and they are the first point of contact for what we're trying to do, and then we just build off of that. And I think it's really important to recognize from a funding perspective that outcome delivery teams don't end, if that makes sense. They evolve over time along with the strategy. So from a funding perspective, in some areas, people are like, oh, here's your $50 for the next year. I'm like, well, all right, so your strategy is going to end next year. And so it's a mind shift with our stakeholders, not only how they interact with us, no longer being order takers, strategic partners at the table. We're helping them with their outcomes. They respect what we do. We teach them about their own data so they can self-serve and they can evangelize. And that's like where we're trying to get to, right? That's the goal.
So I guess one more question for you guys before we turn to the audience, but how far ahead is it reasonable for an organization to be looking? Right? Like a leading organization, given the rapid pace of technology change, is there a window there, 5-year strategy, 1-year strategy, a 10-year strategy? What's the balance point there?
Well, I think there's clearly a huge hype cycle right now. So everybody, is excited about getting started on the Gen AI aspects. And I think it's not unrealistic to say 5 years from now, the landscape's going to look completely different. It's very hard to write a strategy for 2028 where we're sitting today. So it needs to be agile. Like there has to be an element of agility built into that strategy. So I think you build checkpoints, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then be able to iterate on that.
We look out 1 to 3 years right now, but our outcome delivery teams, we're going to be shifting the way that we create our roadmaps and our outlooks. Right now, they're very tactical sounding because we're trying to tackle the initial work that we're in a transition from the order taker to the strategic right now. And so we're having to do a lot of that tactical work, but we're going to weave it into future strategy over time. And so right now, it looks more like a project plan. But when we start looking out 3 to 5 years, it's going to be more customer-centric. These are the things that we couldn't do for our patients that we can do now. That's the lens we're going to be putting on our roadmap going forward. But I think right now, initially for our stage, it's 1 to 3 years. But I would say probably by the middle of 2024, we're going to be starting to look at a 3 to 5 year runway.
Makes a ton of sense to me. That's consistent with what I see with a lot of clients. The one thing I'll add to that is regardless of your strategy, I'll go back to the American football reference. Offenses have come and gone, right? Different flavors. Throw the ball a lot, run the ball a lot, right? But what's consistent is those 5 big dudes in the front, right? That make sure that the quarterback's got time to execute whatever offense it is, right? So, and those 5 big dudes up front in that analogy are garbage inside of the house, understanding what data you have, what's at your disposal, what partnerships are you developing so that you can be nimble in the future to acquire more data, for the inevitable changing algorithmic and just enablement side of the house, right? But it's that foundational component, right, that's not going to change in terms of its need.
Thank you. So I'd like to now turn to the audience. Any questions for our panelists? Please don't be shy. We will have, again, audience a debate in a little bit anyway, so we'll need someone to kick it off. Please.
I would love to hear.
We have a mic coming over, yeah.
I'd love to hear any stories you can share, if there's specific stories. For instance, I think, Mark, you gave an example of beginning quietly, or Jenny, I think you gave some examples of projects where you went through multiple sprints, and like on that one I was curious, how bare bones was that first iteration versus where it eventually got to? So if there's any stories that you could share around those, I'd love to hear them.
And actually, do you mind introducing yourself quickly? I'm sorry, if you'd like to.
I'm sorry?
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
I've never led one. I'm from Decision Brain. We're a software partner to IBM.
Thank you.
So I can give you a little more context on what we've been working on, and you know, you have to remember we're coming from a place of order taker, and we're now like, let us be your strategic partner. So literally, in the example I gave you, the first iteration that we provided was a spreadsheet. Okay, which is good because we're like, okay, here's your data. So what? So what? What are you going to do with it? And then the next time it was a dashboard. And then the next time there were additional graphics. And then we heard a goal. We were like, all right, let's find out the data that underlies this goal. What are all of the different factors that could go into making this change for the organization? And I think that's when the light bulb went off, because they realized at that point that we had the data that they needed. We could measure in a way that was meaningful so that we could provide value to them, and they can do their jobs better. They're making decisions based off of real data, not anecdotes, none of that. It's real, and that's what it looked like. So initially, we met our customers where they were, and built from there. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Maybe just another quick example, tying it into like an ecosystem mindset of I was working with an institution that wanted to cross-sell and upsell better. Well, to be very clear, their CFO wanted to grow the organization organically by 10% and inorganically by X other percent. And on the organic side, cross-selling and upselling, they were underperforming their competitors. And they also had issues with, technical debt. They had issues. They had aspirations of going into the cloud, but they had no idea where to start. They were siloed in terms of their IT organization was a bit of the tail wagging the dog a little bit, where it's more of an even Steven, right? There was just a lot of things there. So we worked on a single use case of let's help this area of the business better cross-sell with this area of the business on this particular use case. And as we worked through that, bringing those two relationship groups, those two business groups together, right? We said, okay, we're going to go on this journey together. We went in, we understood the problem. In data speak, what it was you have master data issues. You have issues with not having single sources of the truth. You certainly have issues with notification. If this gets sold over here, you should try to upsell this. You didn't understand who the customers were. It's a classic example. There's 55 GEs in your system, right? GE, General Electric, blah, 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 right? And you didn't know at your fingertips, you didn't know what products that customer already had, right? We didn't solve it for what products across all, this is not GE, but let me use GE as an example. I'm not saying what product you have of all GE, let's say Johnson & Johnson, because they do have a million different products. I'm not asking what products you have all of them, but for the area in which you wish to cross-sell, what products are relevant, right? And then we helped them build the foundations of mastering that data, of building those communications. We backdoored them into the cloud and said, hey, let's test this in the cloud. So we backdoored the whole organization into the cloud, right? And we did this on the back of just helping this one group cross-sell. And then they bragged the heck out of the success, right? With those relationship managers whose idea of tech and data is my laptop better turn on when I wiggle the mouse, right? But they're bragging up how they trust the information now. That's powerful.
Hey. Well, first, Mark, I'm a Panther fan. Your football analogies are hitting a little too close to home. We're not having a great season. My name is Marcus Beamer. I'm with Truist. My question is, so a lot of times you have to make a decision between building or buying products to service your needs, your data needs. What are some strategies or thought processes that go around choosing which way to go with that type of question?
Do you want to start?
Well, that's a strategy we make as well, right? As evidenced by my peer in Prague right now, talking to the Mansa team that we just acquired to provide data lineage solutions within our watsonx governance. It's a cost-benefit analysis at the end of the day. So we have done this. In my career, I've seen it happen dozens of times where we typically start to build something organically. And we get to a certain point at which we see that it's more cost effective to buy something that's close enough. We rarely, I've seen it happen all different parts of the market share that we've gone after. For example, Red Hat, right? They were clearly a pinnacle acquisition. We're not going to go off and reinvent a new container platform at that point. So again, at the end of the day, it comes down to cost-benefit analysis. How much money am I spending in investing this product? Do I have the right mind share necessary to build it myself versus just simply acquiring and head starting that? You have to balance that with is it going to be the right culture fit for the rest of everything else we're going to do? If you're buying a product, you're not buying a company, you're buying a product at that point. It's a little different. But still, is it somebody that you can trust? Is it a partner that shares the same ethics and values? Are they going to be here for the long term? Those are the factors that come to mind immediately. Yes?
Yeah.
So in addition to what we heard, predominantly the decision is not always the same. It's not one size that fits all, right? You could either buy or you could either build. However, it depends on the expertise that you have in-house to build something from scratch and the ability to upkeep a product that you build yourself. Right. Because you need to keep up with the trends that's happening in the industry, and then you need to constantly put effort and energy to upkeep the product. Would you have resources, skill set, time, energy, and money to do all of it? That's one of the major criteria. And the second thing that you would look at is, are you market leaders in the space? Would you spend your energy in building something, or rather you would spend your energy in solving business problems? That's very critical for your organization. Apart from the cost benefit, these are other things that you might want to evaluate when you look at build versus buy decision.
Yeah.
And more importantly, there is also architectural considerations in terms of integration with your current ecosystem. Would the product that you're planning to buy, would this fit in my current ecosystem? Or would there be a challenge when I have to integrate this suite of tools with another product that already I own? Where does this fit? Or would I have better luck if I build something on my own so I don't have any integration issues? If I buy a product, do I end up in doing customizations? So let's say I pay $1 million for a product, but I had to do 50% customization. Am I making any value of buying the product? Would I rather build everything from scratch, right? Those are all some questions that you need to look at before you arrive at a decision of build.
That's a great point.
Yep.
It's a great point. I like to, I'm an analogy guy. I'm sure you all picked up on that. Here is here's your new shirt, your uniform. Here is a blank balance sheet. Here's a blank P&L. Congratulations, you are now in the business of that thing. Whatever it is you decided to build, you are now in the business of that thing, right? So, if you apply that mindset all the way across the people piece, do you want to be a leader? If you apply that mindset, it tends to bring things to the surface quickly to help you make that decision. Those decisions are hard.
Yeah. And actually, do you mind introducing yourself very quickly?
Yeah, I'm Veena Thanikachalam. Sorry. Meena Thanikachalam. I lead data and analytics for Banco Popular Bank. We are a regional bank based out of the United States and also Caribbean, Puerto Rico, and Virgin Islands.
Perfect, thank you. And with that, actually, we're going to wrap up this first session. I want to thank Andy, Jenny, and Mark. Really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Oh, we go this way.
So with that, yeah, I'd like to welcome up our panelists for the second panel, please. Welcome. Hey. Yeah, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Anita Luthra. I work for JP Morgan Chase. I'm also an adjunct at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. I will make a disclaimer. The opinions here today are my own. I work in the AI ML, our enterprise AI ML division. I'm a lead architect, a VP and a lead architect.
Great. Good afternoon. Vishal Bala. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Advocate Health. You may know us as Atrium in this market. And I'm about 7 years old in healthcare. Come from a different industry. And what we do in what is experience, right? What does a chief experience officer do? I get asked that. So I'll be very brief, but sure. Essentially it's about attracting and retaining individuals, patients, team members, physicians. We also have Wake Forest University, so faculty, learners, and volunteers. And what does that mean? That means giving them an experience so that you, irrespective of who you are at that time when you're interacting with us, are willing to put your social capital on the table to recommend us as a place to get care, to work, to teach, to learn, to volunteer.
So I'm going to dive right in, and as you can see, this session is on generative AI and talent. We discussed this a little bit at the roundtable this afternoon, but generative AI, overhyped, underhyped, or properly hyped?
That's a bit of a mixed bag. I think it was released to the market early. There are some serious considerations with generative AI that we need to consider. And one of that is how the data is actually used, where the data is sourced from. So one of the biggest concerns that we have right now is up to this point, our systems were closed. We knew where our data was coming from. We knew what our sources were. We were able to manage those sources. What makes generative AI different, and this is where the mixed bag comes in, we now have, number one, access to a lot more data. Number two, we do not know where the data is coming from, and we don't know what elements of toxicity, bias, or accuracy are in the data. So while we look at the modality of the data, whether it's text, whether it's image, the fact that we can actually talk and talk easily and make AI available to an average user rather than a PhD or a data scientist is a huge win. The downside of it is being aware of where the drawbacks are and how to use it effectively and which industries and which use cases to use it effectively in.
I agree with you 100%. And if I may add, I think from a healthcare perspective and otherwise, we always say, garbage in, garbage out, right? And we have such disparate data. And in healthcare, as some of us know, the data is protected to some extent. So you can't necessarily identify the biases in the data, right? So keeping that in mind, I think this is game-changing, of course, but we have to be intentional about where when and how we utilize it. We talked about having Sherpas, right? So I say it's like we need to have guidelines, and within that, when we democratize data and LLMs and other models, within the guardrails that we establish very thoughtfully, starting from governance to policies, we allow people, if they want to go off on an uncharted path, they have to have the right Sherpa with them, right? So not sure we're ready for Sherpas yet, but we need to make sure our data are connected and are able to be defined correctly, consistently across the entire platform that we're utilizing.
Would you say that there are off-the-shelf Gen AI use cases that are enterprise-ready, organization-ready from your guys' perspective yet, or would you still have hesitancy over sort of all of it?
I think there are enterprise use cases that are ready today. Take a situation, there's not a company I know of that does not pay for travel. When you're talking about paying for travel, that is a common use case. You'll use a Cursor wagon lead, you'll use whatever system you've got. Travel is constantly moving, it's constantly changing. However, the ability to get to that data, to get through it quickly, and to get reams of information at your fingertips, depending on which model you're using, is a built-in use case. Another built-in use case, programming. If you're going to be using it to program systems, there are certain things that it's very good at. Be aware, though, if you're going to be using it for mathematics, Gen AI does not perform as well. So you want to be careful what Gen AI you're using, which scenarios it's useful in, and you also need to understand the model you're using because different models have different specializations.
I come more from a user end, and you obviously have the other end. So I appreciate that perspective on the panel. Of course, we will start off with low risk aspects, and there are many tools out there. There are some ready to deploy within specific segments that you can bring behind your firewall and try, or you could use a platform. Shouldn't take names, but there are some platforms that are available that have blocks that you can just pull together. So I think it's ripe for trying out in your industry, but it's very contextual. And again, we need to be intentional, pilot, low risk, and then keep PDSA.
So in case someone doesn't fully understand the term context as you mean it, do you mind explaining that a little bit?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. So I always say data without context is like body without the soul, right? If you just have the data and you don't apply the context, so a body without the soul is dead. A soul without the body is a ghost, right? So we need to make sure that the people who are going to apply the data have the data in the right time for the right person that is usable for them in the literacy level that they need, so that they become ambassadors to promote whatever we're helping them with, enabling.
So let me give you an example, and this comes from my teaching background, so I apologize for that. I was working on scenarios this morning and I won't tell you which model I was using, but it's just been updated, and it does have access to all of Google's information. And one of the things that I was doing to get context right was trying to figure out how would you answer a question in the right tone. So when I was putting the context for the answer in, I was putting in a professional setting, I was putting in the role of a data scientist, I was putting in the role of a PhD. So I was looking at very specific things in terms of context to get the right tone, to get the right answer. And I also asked it to provide its sources to reduce the level of hallucination and to make sure that the data was valid. So those are some of the things when you're talking about context that it's very important to understand.
And if I can give another example, please, from healthcare, and it's a challenge we have. With the right intention, sometimes, if we just use data, we could be heading in a different direction than we intended to solve, unintended consequences. So we know value-based purchasing, i.e. the patient feedback impacts the revenue an organization makes, whether it's from the government agencies or from insurance. The data we get is from the patients who respond. The socioeconomic and demographic profile of the patients who respond to surveys is not necessarily reflective of the patients we serve. And we're incentivized as organizations to listen to what we're hearing and respond. And so we're not, conversely, listening to what we don't hear. And therefore we're not responding, thereby, inadvertently, our efforts are increasing the gap. And then our costs go up, and then we increase the incentive. So the normalization without transparency is difficult, but I'm confident with the right minds in the room, we could build those algorithms, if you will, and neural networks to recorrect and keep correcting as the profile changes, so we're as live as possible, and our multi-billion-dollar investments we're making as a country in different industries are more effective.
I'd like to turn to the talent piece specifically for a moment. So obviously, 5-10 years ago, there was a whole wave of both academic and public interest news and research on the labor replacing potential of artificial intelligence, right? You know, it was all predicted to happen within the next 10, 15, 20 years. That didn't really emerge. And then all of a sudden with new Gen AI advances, I think that whole conversation has become very top of mind again. And there's a sense, at least from some corners I've seen, that, oh, this may be it now. You know, this may be what we were promising 10 years ago. Finally, you know, the true labor replacing potential of AI is here in a meaningful way. At the thinking about sort of bridging that to the organizational level, how do you guys think about the way in which Gen AI, today, and thinking 5 or 10 years down the line, which you may or may not be thinking that far ahead as we were just talking about, how does that interact with your staffing strategies or your training strategies? Is there a commodification of specialized knowledge such that you may not need some of the people you need now, and if so, do you need other people instead, or do you not?
If I may.
Please.
We haven't embarked upon this yet, but addressing the issue in our workforce pledge workforce of the future. I personally believe, disclaimer, I personally believe that it's got to be a two-pronged approach. One is to enable, end of the day, who are we creating data for is the people who utilize it every day to influence change and run the operation, right? And create what we need them to create. And so at lunch, one of the gentlemen had talked extensively about storytelling. That's very important to get things moving. Now, who tells the best story is the person who uses it, and the team who uses it effectively will tell the story, and that's how we win the game. In order to do that, we have to go two ways, keeping in mind that any solution we come up with is short term. When we come up with a solution, it's going to be out of date soon, right? So keeping that in mind, we need to democratize, and in pockets, and I use the word intentionally, to train some of our users in basic using the building blocks of AI, if you will, or at least ML, so they can come from their end, and because we will never have enough resources to bring the ideal skill set talent in from an AI perspective or ML perspective. So at least get the people who know the context building their skill sets, and at the same time feed in high skill level that is needed again where we need it the most.
How much are you talking about in this case prompt engineering skills versus more traditional
Yes.
AI, ML ops, engineering, like whatever it may be?
So the prompt engineering stuff, absolutely. Again, I would heavily promote that in pockets where low risk and teams that we can build that skill set where we, as an organization, think that we can leverage that technology, that where we're ready.
And if I may, contrary to a lot of things that I've heard, I actually believe that this move, rather than being exclusive and taking people out of the market, is inclusive and brings people in that did not have access before. And the reason for that is if you look at Biden's most recent act for AI ML, if you look at the GDPR, if you look at the EU AI Act, what is it targeting? It is targeting exclusions. It's targeting groups that have been ethnically or for any other reason, gender bias. It's up to this point, there's been no way to measure toxicity, bias. So to bring people in, what we need to do now is be more inclusive, more consciously engaging the people that need to come in. So prompt engineering can be trained on the model, and it doesn't matter how good you are at a ChatGPT. If you're going to be using a Bard or an Anthropic, you're going to have to retrain. So the types of people that you want are people from every generation. You want people that have been out of the market that we're going to be pulling back in. These are our hardcore AI data scientists, our researchers, our mathematicians. We also want the teenagers in there and the young 20s on the other end, because these are our customers. These are the people that are going to be using it. And you want everything in between, because if for example, I'm using a Gen AI to solve a health problem, I'm using it to solve a problem to sell to or market to a customer, to get that diversity and to get the richness of what's available in a generative AI or in AI in general, we need that inclusion, not the exclusion.
How much of that is a diversity of data versus a diversity of workforce, though?
I think it's both. The reason is, for you to do prompt engineering, to even recognize that there is a bias and a toxicity, you have to have different ways of looking at it. You have to have, so what happens as you're doing prompt engineering, as you're getting results back, as you're working with the model, you're training that model. You're training the model, you're training the answers. So the more rich the data is and the questions and the ability to leverage that richness, the better you are and the more effective that model's going to be.
I would agree on that and suggest that the data is reflective and normalized to not just the customer, but also the people who are working. So if we were to take it out of the technology context into serving, especially in healthcare, we talk about our teams being reflective of the teams, the people who serve being reflective of the people we serve, so we get the context, right? And this is no different. And so we need to have the data and the prompt engineers trained. So we have, when we are solutioning, we bring our customer in, we call them patient family advisory councils. Every healthcare system does that. I don't see why the patient family advisory councils who are representative of the patients we serve should not be. Some of them shouldn't be engaged in the prompt engineering, so we're solutioning together.
What does that look like in practice? I'm just not totally clear yet. How, like, in what might it look like for the patient's families to be involved in the prompt engineering?
So to engage them in terms of, so we bring them on as volunteers. So we do some training for volunteers so we could incorporate this into that program.
Okay.
And so as we are looking to solution, we will currently, when we include our customers, our patients, in the solutioning, the same way we would include people who are trained in that skill, in the prompt engineering, to be able to help as we table test before. If we come up with a solution, we want to make sure that our customers are saying, yes, this will work, before you go and invest funds in.
So let me try to address that a little bit differently. Let's say I've got a team of 10 people. Normally, when you're building a team up of 10 people and they're growing up in a corporation, any corporation, big or small, whether we consciously realize it or not, we tend to have certain ways of evaluating, and those patterns of evaluation are repetitive. So whether we realize it or not, we tend to hire the same type of people on a team, a similar type of people. In order for us to be truly effective in the Gen AI space for prompt engineering, as an example, we have to consciously make an effort to make sure that team is diverse. That team is made up of different opinions. You definitely will go through the storming, forming, and norming approach as you do it, but what we have to do is teach people on that team to accept that diversity of opinion and thought, because that is the type of skill set and the type of team that we need to make sure that we are truly delivering what is needed.
So I'd like to open up to the audience for a couple of questions before we wrap up the session. Anyone want to kick us off?
Hi, I'm Jerrielle Thornburg-May, and I'm from Pearson Learning. I just want to say, Anita, thank you so much for bringing this important topic of diversity into the discussion. We have an opportunity right now to build diversity into the data, into the modeling, and this is a critical point. If you look around the room, this is not a population that's reflective of our population as a whole, either here in the US or globally, certainly. So I just want to underscore the importance of what you're saying and hope that we'll all take on the complicated, not so obvious, how do we solve this problem together as a group. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so one, I have to be honest, when I think about generative AI and AI period, it terrifies me, but also excites me, and I think that's important to understand as we move forward with it. But we were talking about prompt engineering. So I've had a couple conversations with folks, and one of the challenges that I'd just like to ask you guys and anybody else in the audience, how does a company come up with the base prompt rules for their company? So for example, I'm in finance, so like a base rule would be like, you never share the account number, right? Is there strategies or things that you guys have explored
Yes.
to like establish those, and like how does that look, and maybe a little detail around how you explain it to leadership and then make sure leadership has signed off and is okay with that?
If I'm actually just broaden the question from what it sounds like, it's ultimately about data governance strategies for Gen AI, right? So not just with regards to the prompts themselves, but more broadly, like.
I am in data governance, so.
Okay.
You go ahead.
Okay, so this is going to be a little bit technical. One of the things that we need to be very careful of when we are using a public model is that we understand the data sourcing. So with companies like Google, with companies like Microsoft, there are specific channels that can be used to make sure that data stays in-house integrity. That's one of the things. It is going to require partnerships at an enterprise level to keep the data safe. The other thing is there are other approaches that are being explored. There's an approach called model chaining, where you have your Gen AI, you have another smaller model. Hugging Face, if you look out on Hugging Face, that's a good example of where you can see some of this work done. But you chain another model. The other thing is you're very careful and you've got guardrails on what information can go in and out. Those are some of the things that you would use, and that's where the governance and the legal would also come in, because the other thing that most people don't think of that we're working through, that you would end up working through right now, is which region am I sitting in? A GDPR rule and an EU AI Act is going to be different than a New Jersey AI Act, and you're going to have to make sure where you're sitting, who is accessing the data, and what information you're passing back and forth.
Any other questions?
Could you comment a little bit on your experience around, there's a lot to AI besides just Gen AI, right? And there's kind of bringing a gun to a knife fight kind of scenario with do you really need to get to that level, right? So what's been your experiences that you've seen in right sizing, I guess might be the right way to say it?
Gen AI is not a hammer for every nail. And a lot of times, even when we use AI, there may not be a need for it. So there's a place for data, there's a place for AI, there's a place for Gen AI. And that depends on your use case.
One of the opportunities that large language models can do for us. So I agree with you firstly. Also machine learning, right?
Yes.
So data is clean, machine learning, AI, LLMs, Gen AI, kind of that sequence, and depending on what you want to look for. I think one awesome opportunity in terms of quick wins that we could utilize is really democratizing to some extent in pockets, maximizing the qualitative data. That's a huge treasure trove we have that we have not effectively mined. So there are many small diamonds that we put away. So if we go back historically, we're able to really make huge differences in terms of quick wins using some of this technology.
I think I want to push on that question a little bit more, just in terms of when would you advise against AI at all, right? I mean, like when might you say, whether in your organization or just as a general recommendation, I think we're trying to get too complicated here, right? I mean, this could be a conversation, this could be a focus group, I mean, whatever it might be, like anything.
I think firstly is if our data is not clean. Don't even think, let's not even go there. Secondly is what is the use? What is the end user? Who is the person, operations person who's going to utilize the data, or strategically, right? Depending on where you're feeding. And thirdly is the sources that we're utilizing, and are they normalized, to your point? Do we have the whole, and if they're not normalized, again, to utilize it will lead us down the wrong paths.
So the other thing might be, there are tools out there like Tableau, like ClickView, they're dashboards, right? If I've got data and I can easily query the data with a good person that's querying the data, whether it's SQL or NoSQL, whatever, and I'm getting good results with that, then use that. There's no need for AI or ML. If, however, I'm in scenarios right now, and AWS actually does this, it uses a tool called Macy, but one of the things that I'm looking for is there PII in the data? There I might want to have something AI crawling the data, right? So it kind of depends on the scenario. You could actually use AI to help you identify PII and clean the data, but there are other tools out there that may be just as effective. So those are the things you want to look at. You want to go for the lowest complexity and the lowest maintenance. Someone in the room brought that up earlier about the build versus buy. It's a similar concept. The foundational principle doesn't change.
Another way also is generating insights from multiple disparate feeds, if you will, data feeds once they're aligned. We're working on piloting something in, again, non-clinical outside, but we'll be able to generate insights more from, rather than just reporting.
Thank you. I think with that, we'll wrap the session up. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
So with that, we have one more session before we'll take a quick break. And as I mentioned, this is going to be an interactive session. So I'm going to provide a prompt to everyone here. And then I want to see a show of hands about who agrees with this prompt. So the prompt, as it says here, is this house believes data culture is more important than talent. So you can think about it for a moment, in 30 seconds or so, and then after I'm going to want to see a show of hands about who believes that you agree with this statement. And we'll start there, and then just so you know, at the end of this session, we will take another show of hands to see if anyone's been convinced one way or the other. So think about it. Okay, so this house believes data culture is more important than talent. Who would agree with that statement? Please raise your hand. I'm seeing, okay. Most of this table, keep your hand up just so I can get a sense. If you want to look around, it seems about half and half from what I can tell. Does anyone who's just raised your hand feel comfortable kicking the conversation off, advocating for this position against those who have not yet raised their hands but may by the end of this session, about 25 minutes from now? Go for it.
I'll fall on that sword. You can teach people talent, right, and have people grow in talent, and evolve to become more sophisticated with that talent without the culture to start it, and culture grows as well. But without the culture there to begin with, you can be, the analogy, you can be the most talented plumber in a room full of doctors, no one's going to care, right? So, you have to build that culture. You have to be in the right place. You have to demonstrate that it's of value in a sustained way, and grow the talent. I could argue the other side too, but I'm going with today.
Thank you. Thank you for being the brave soul to kick us off here. I saw a lot of hands that were not raised. I think at this table over here, over there, and sort of through this corner. Yeah, please. The mic, I think, is right around your back. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Dror. I'm the CFO of a manufacturing company based in South Carolina.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I do wonder if the people who raised their hands compared to those who didn't, where you stand depends on where you sit. I could not disagree more. Maybe it's because we're, for the people who are coming from smaller companies, only tens of millions in sales, it's the people, it's the talent. The data needs to support the business, and kind of the conversation that has been going on here for the past hour didn't really talk about the business, how we grow the business. Again, finance guy, how does it support sales? How does it reduce expenses? And finding good people is very difficult. Maybe for the billion-dollar companies, Novant Health, you can pay $300,000 a year salaries. I don't know. I cannot. Hard to find, and more important than the data. With the talent will come the data.
Any reactions? I think we can turn over to either side at this point. But please do state your position, or just make sure it's clear. And please also give an introduction at the beginning of your point. We can maybe go to here and then to the corner.
Thanks. I'm Erin Byrne. I'm from TE Connectivity, a large manufacturer as well, and I do disagree with the statement. Just very simply, talent is what builds the culture, right? So we did have some discussion earlier in the day about, the field is moving so fast that the culture needs to evolve with the talent, the data. Unless you believe the data is going to drive the culture, I think that the talent ultimately is going to win here and has to drive the culture, and therefore the data culture derives from the talent. That's the logic.
Thanks. You just, I think, hand it, yeah.
So I'm going to sort of disagree with the statement and amend it to say that the culture is as important as the talent. And so Jennifer Redman, I'm VP of AI Intelligent Automation at Fidelity right now. So we have 11.5 trillion in assets under administration, so very different scenario than you're in. But previously, I was at Cisco Systems, and I was the first chief data evangelist in Fortune 500, then first chief data and analytics evangelist. And part of my role was to develop a data-driven culture. And the way that I ended up kind of putting the framework together was to look at data literacy as well as data enablement. So what I found is that if you have somebody who's very data literate, but they don't have the tools that help with scalability or deployment or things like that, they're kind of these siloed high performers, and they can't get their insights out to the rest of the business. If you have somebody who maybe has all the tools at their hand, but they're not data literate, they're very enthusiastic, but can't really do anything about it. And then if you don't have data literacy and you don't have data enablement, then you're just kind of laggards, which I don't think we have any of those in this room. But then if you're high on both dimensions, right? Imagine like a Gartner quadrant. If you have high data literacy and then you have high data enablement, then you have people who are really high performers. And to do that, and that kind of depends based on role, right? Like what tools you need and what education you need. So the way I kind of looked at it initially, and the way I kind of kicked it off quickly, was to look at people in different roles, and then find somebody who is a high performer because they were data driven, and then looking at that and say, okay, let's start here instead of spending like 3 years evaluating every single role across 150,000 person company, but rather saying, okay, this person's doing this and that's how they're performing well. Let's get everyone up to that same standard of literacy and enablement, and then just keep moving on and on.
Okay, so we've gotten some pro-culture, pro-talent, and then a third middle way, equally important. Yeah. Actually, sorry, we have a microphone coming your way.
Okay. Navra from Decision Brain again. I have a counterexample of where data culture can backfire if you don't do it right. When I joined Decision Brain a couple years ago to lead sales and marketing, one of the first things I did was I implemented a CRM system, and I got all of our spreadsheet-based sales forecasting data in, and then we put all of our marketing data in, it was like months of effort, and finally I had some analytics and some trends, and I showed it to my CEO, who, by the way, is a data guy. He's a PhD in math. He's very smart. And he said, I don't care, or I don't trust that, because there was this other guy at this other company, and he always showed all these amazing marketing trend dashboards, and we never actually got any meaningful leads. So I'm scarred, he said. So, let's wait a little while and make sure that that actually translates into something meaningful. So sometimes when you're too good with data and you're not using it effectively, we have to be careful, right? Because data, as we know, from what was that book, How to Lie with Data and Analytics, or something like that, that famous book. But we have to also not give it a bad reputation by using it in the wrong way.
Thank you.
I'm Greg Jones. I'm with a company called Kajit. I want to agree with Aaron, and what we're trying to say up there is, chicken and an egg, right? I believe talent has to come first, is my belief. And just because my son told me this joke this morning, I'll tell you, we are going to get an answer to that by tomorrow, because I did order a chicken and egg on Amazon, so I'll tell you which one came first. So.
Is there anyone who has I see some hands, so let's go here. Then I'm curious if there's anyone in the room who has a particularly strident opinion who hasn't raised your hand yet. Would love to hear from you. Whether that's for or against the prompt, or just totally disagreeing with it altogether. But please.
My name is Hannah Mantri. I work for ADP. I lead the sales analytics team over there. I kind of agree to the statement that, culture and talent are, both are important, but I feel like data culture is slightly more important than talent, only because I could have engineers build any kind of product, but if I don't have that culture of acceptance, I'm just going to give out products which no one is going to be using. So I need that data culture, and from top down, right, starting from the CEO, everyone should understand and want to have that product. Otherwise, we can have as many cooks, as many engineers, as many people building products, but no one is going to be using it. So if I need the benefit out of it, I need to have that culture built in. Bottom up.
Hey, Marcus Beamer. So I raised my hand and said I'm with it. Now I'm like, no, this needs some rewording. So first, I would add the word good before data culture. I think that addresses what the young lady was saying. You got to have a good data culture. I'd also like to point out that you need some very special talent first to start your good data culture. So it really starts with talent, so you can't say it's more important, right? However, talent comes and goes. And if you really want your talent to excel at delivering what you need to give them a good data culture to function in. I've had the good fortune to work for a $1 million company and an $8 billion company. And what I can say is I've seen rock stars come in, and if not given the proper boundaries, they will go and create a monstrosity. And they have all the talent in the world, but they apply themselves in the wrong direction. And that's why the good data culture is what can guide them. And talent's going to come and go. So you got to be ready for that. So I'd probably change the is more important to is as important. And then I don't know where you put in that. You got to find that first person that's going to build that good data culture for you.
Okay, so more advocacy for the middle position.
Hi there. My name is Ori. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Deliverite, a logistics startup. So I'm going to take a different aggressive approach here. So I'm going to cross it all entirely.
Perfect.
I'm going to say this house believe in reality. And what do I mean by that? I work with our sales and marketing team. And one thing I do with them every week, I ask them the really tough and real question. No bullshit. This is like, because they can put the graph. I think you mentioned about the graph, the nice, beautiful graph with the curve. But at the end of the day, you see what's happened in your bank account, pretty much, okay? And they can tell you, oh, we're talking to this account. But I always ask them, did this account send the money? If they did not send the money, it doesn't matter, okay? So and that's one question, of course. But it's if you just push your team about reality, check every day, every question as a concrete numeral number. It's not, oh, I feel great about this account. I feel that this account actually converted and signed and booked shipment, et cetera, et cetera. That's make your entire decision making a lot more real, a lot more of like, you know what things happening in the right direction, or sometimes the bad news is the great news because you're not doing what you're supposed to do, and you just, I think Jenny mentioned you kill it right away, right? You want to just kill it right away, and that's our practice. Some people have a hard time because that's a very different culture. That I used to work for Citibank for many years. It's a great big company, but it's a lot of bullshit. So you have sometimes to clear the bullshit, especially a smaller company like Dror mentioned. You can't really take the luxurious feeling of losing a $50 million because you're Citibank. In Citibank, I could do it, but in a startup, you can't do those days. So that's my 2 cents.
Everyone. My name is Caitlin McCarthy. I'm from IBM with our field marketing team. So I'm kind of with you on this. At first, I had like a very concrete opinion on this.
Sorry, which you are you with? I don't
with definitely that starting out believing that talent is more important than data culture at first, and then I'm now changing my mind like you did. With the idea that, at IBM we talk to a lot of different customers around people, process, and technology, and I always say that people always come first in the order of people, process, and technology. With the idea that you can have the best technology in the entire world, but if you don't have the people behind it, then you're really not getting anywhere. So that was the first idea I had. But then I reread the question, and I want all of us to think about in terms of like what talent are we talking about? Because first I'm thinking like human talent, but then there's also automated talent. A lot of us are probably looking to automate some of our workflows, automate our talent through chatbots, through AI. And if we're talking about automated talent, whether it be a chatbot or something that's replacing your human that's usually doing the work, I absolutely believe that data culture is more important than that, because in order to have those successful chatbots, if you will, or automated talent, you have to have the data behind it to support it. So now viewing the question in a different way. So I've changed teams.
Okay, I'm going to be an advocate for data culture being more important. Culture is the combined systems and structures and belief systems and practices and processes that are shared among people. And it's the culture that will allow the talent to thrive or to wither. So I think the culture certainly comes first. It's larger than the talent. It'll give rise to or quash talent.
Actually, I have a slightly different question. We've heard, I'll pose the question, and if you want to answer it, you can, or if you want to make your original point, please do. We've obviously heard different perspectives on whether talent, culture, or balance, but I'm curious if there's anyone here who has strong opinions on the trend, right? So is talent becoming more important relative to culture, or is talent becoming less important relative to culture, which is a slightly different question, but I think informs this one as well and is an important one. So, do we think that culture 5 years or 10 years down the line will be much more important relative to talent than it is now, or do we think that's not the case? If anyone has an opinion on that they want to provide.
Interesting perspective. I would also say, what can you change faster, and what impacts the other the more, right? So what is culture? Culture is how things are done here, and that stays even when your talent changes. And your culture can impact the attraction and retention of individuals and your customers. So one does impact the other. In the future, as we, again, I forget who talked about defining talent. Does that mean your bots are in your talent, or are you looking at human talent? And so the talent will be impacted, how you build that talent, how you train our people, if it's people or bots that serve our customers, will be influenced by the culture that we want to have, by the values that we espouse, by our behaviors of us and our bots. So I think it is middle of the road, but we need to remember it's not linear. It's a system dynamics. So one impacts the other, which impacts the other. Thank you.
I'll try one more on talent again. I'll be the talent champion here. I do think the question about pace is a governing question here, right?
Sure.
And so when you're in an era of very rapid change, you know, we can all talk about different technological epochs that we've been in. This is one. And if we think change is accelerating, this is where people get on top of the change and set the new culture and set the pace of adaptation of the culture. So it's another point about why I would definitely choose talent in a time of rapid change.
So we all know this is in the middle, right? But you know, again, playing off the culture. So just to play the opposite side a little bit of what was just stated is, in the future, so there's going to be a talent of being able to use common sense and, you know, being trained in a way of thinking, right, to credibly challenge what's coming out of the machine, right? And so there's going to be a different kind of talent needed, which is a discernment type of talent. And the terrifying thing to me is I think that that part of it is going to separate even more the haves and have-nots in society already. So that part, I think education is critical to teach people that new talent, right, of that discernment, right, which we're all seeing is already under assault every day, right? So I think from that perspective, talent's important, among many other reasons. But when it comes to a culture of the fact that you need to critically think about it, right? I mean, you can define it on both sides, which is the whole intent of the discussion. But I think that culture of data is going to be in your face and continually more and more and more ability to influence you, and so there's a culture of data coming at you in a deluge, but there's a talent behind discernment too.
So I think we have time for maybe one or more opinions. I'm curious if there's anyone else who, please go ahead, but after, if there's anyone else who's willing to ground your perspective in your organizational experience, because I think, not in a bad way, we've gotten a little high level again here of saying society is like this and it should be like this versus that. And I appreciate again that you said, well, for me, this is our constraints, this is how we, and I'm sorry that I forgot your name, this is how we operate, and therefore, at least where I sit, talent, it has to be more important. And so I'm curious if there's anyone else who feels that you have a sort of organization first perspective on this debate. I'd love to hear that before we wrap up, but please, before that,
yeah, and actually that kind of ties to what I was going to say, and I agree with Vishal that it's either a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle between talent and culture and education. But there's so many ways that you can influence a data culture. Like, for example, some of the things I put in place at Cisco were Kaggle-style competitions that I would launch every 6 months and then get senior executives on board to solve a real business problem. And then at the next competition, when we would read out the winners, you would have the case study, and then you would launch the next one, right? And I'll tell you, money helps. When people see like a large bounty, it can definitely help the culture, as well as we started doing awards. Actually, I know it's being recorded, but once I put on a ball gown in front of all of Cisco TV, and then somehow got stuck under a table, and thankfully there's someone on stage who lifted it up, so I didn't flash the entire company. But those awards were really helpful and really meaningful too, because it showed that for these, what we were able to do is to kind of find where people had made huge differences using data, and then share those stories with the entire company. So I think there's just so much you can do in the culture space that complements the education space, and then you can kind of keep both of those increasing as you get a higher data culture. You continue to increase people's data literacy and back and forth and back and forth.
Time for, I think, one more opinion. I'd love to hear from someone new if there's someone who hasn't contributed yet and would like to, but if not, happy for a final pitch from someone who already spoke earlier. Sure, thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Sinclair, and I'm with Novant Health. I think that this question is so interesting because it just depends on where your organization is, right? If you're at a place where you're small and you really just are trying to grow, you need that talent. And then eventually you're going to get to the point where you need that culture to drive that talent, and it just evolves. And if you're at a place where you have really some type of culture, whether that's good or bad, you're going to want talent to either foster or change that depending on the situation. So I think it's all kind of, somebody said contextual. I think it all is that. From our company, I can tell you from what we've done, it's been really interesting because we had a specific culture and we had to kind of bring in new people to shift that culture and to take us to the place where we wanted to go. And I think for us, it was all about that talent. And now it's getting to a point where, okay, so we have the right people, but we need to really define what that culture has to be or we think it should be to get us to that strategic place we want to go. So now it's, okay, so we have the right people in the room. Let's define that culture. Let's build it out and foster that. So I think I don't know, you asked earlier, do we care more about the talent or is it the culture? It all just depends on where you are.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to do one last show of hands again to see if anyone's minds have been changed. We were about 50-50. And to start, I am going to force the either or here, and then I will either hand up for or against this, essentially. I then am curious to see if anyone agrees with the position that they're equally important. So there will be an opportunity for those who have been swayed in that direction. But just to start, if you believe that data culture is more important than talent, please raise your hand. And again, this is either, in this case, if you have to pick one or the other, and you pick this statement that data culture is more important than talent, please raise your hand. I see about the same people, I think. There's maybe one or two fewer, but I don't see a lot of necessarily changed minds, which is interesting. If you buy into the idea that they're roughly equally important, I'm curious for a show of hands. Okay, so some people have raised their hand for both, but it's also a third of the room. Interesting. Okay. That wraps our third session, though. We'll have about a 15 or so minute break, and we'd encourage everyone to come back for our last two sessions before we then wrap for the afternoon and have a reception for drinks and networking. But thank you all for taking the time to be here so far, and see you again shortly. Thank you. Hello, all. Great. For those of you who are standing, if you don't mind coming and sitting back down, we're going to kick off the last sessions of the afternoon. And then there, again, will be one more opportunity after we wrap up for drinks and networking as well. So if you've been having a great conversation, please keep it on pause and then restart it again after. Great. So I'd like to welcome up our next set of panelists for our next session. Thank you.
Hi. How are you doing? Nice to meet you. I'm going to get some of this.
Yeah, please. So could I ask you to, one by one, please introduce yourselves, and then we'll kick off, and we can start from the end.
Sure. Good evening, everybody.
I think a little higher. I think if you can just raise it a little higher, maybe. It's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm,
hold it closer to your mouth. Yeah.
is it fine?
Yeah. No,
okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Meena Thanikachalam. I work for a regional bank called Banco Popular. We are serving the Latin population in Puerto Rico, and also we have presence in the US in New York and Florida. I lead data and analytics. I sit within the business, reporting into the Chief Operating Officer. Glad to be part of this session, and I was glad to learn from everyone so far, and I hope we'll have some good conversation with our peers and colleagues.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Redmond, VP of Artificial Intelligence and Intelligent Automation at Fidelity Investments. I use the same disclaimer Nina did, which is these opinions are my own, and should you want Fidelity's official opinions, I can get you to our PR people.
That's a good one. Richard Donaldson, if anyone knows how to open these waters, that would be awesome. I think they're just for show. Is it just me? No? Thanks. I work at your friendly neighborhood utility, Duke Energy. If you live down here, if you live in any of the other states we operate, then proud to call you customers. I lead our digital transformation organization, which I realize is a totally loaded name, but think about what is now all our application, business unit facing application delivery and support. We also have a large data scientist practice, we have a large software engineering practice, and we have a lot of architecture and cloud that we take very seriously nestled into that. So just excited to be here, and these will be my opinions, not Duke Energy's. Good catch.
All opinions are just your opinions.
Yes, thank you.
So to kick off, obviously this discussion will be about responsible and ethical AI. What steps can an organization take to establish trust and build out a responsible and ethical system from design all the way through to deployment and monitoring of an AI system or product?
So when we say responsible AI, it's a spectrum of ideas that any organization would look for. Primarily, building a safe, secure, and trustworthy AI is very important, and especially with Gen AI, a lot of recent trends. It's not necessarily the certain group within an organization that's responsible for building responsible AI. It's everyone in the organization who could play a vital part. Predominantly, when we say responsible AI, there are two pillars. One is the risk and also the cybersecurity in an organization. However, I think beyond the risk and cybersecurity organization, the entire organization needs to participate, be it as data, digital, infrastructure, technology. All of them have a vital role to play. And in mitigating the risks. For example, with Gen AI, our friends talked about content creation. We talked about processing images or creating new images. We talked about creating content. But if you take those examples, there's a part for everyone to play in it, right? So marketing organization, for example, they might be interested in taking the new content and advertising, and would be interested in providing personalized recommendations to their customers. So while marketing is a primary driver, the risk team had to look at like what sort of content it is. Are there any hallucinations in the content, right? Is this the right content for the right audience? And are there any biases? Predominantly, when we talk about AI, a lot of challenge comes with regards to biases that are unintended. It's not intentional, but unknowingly some bias can get introduced. It could be racial, or it could be gender, or it could be socioeconomic, or it could be other biases. So how do we mitigate these risks, and how do we handle a solution that can be delivered without impacting the safety, security, or trustability of AI? That's something that many organizations are looking at solving. It's not necessarily this is all new topic. Traditional AI had some challenges mitigating the risks associated with AI and AI-driven models. So I know like IBM has been the sponsor for this event. IBM has a fairness evaluation toolkit for AI models, right? That's open source. So while we can use some of these toolkits, the responsibility lies among all of the teams that participates to deliver a solution, AI solution, in testing and making sure that we can validate the model for biases or detect any biases early on. That's one aspect. The second aspect is how do we make sure that whatever solution that we are delivering is intended for the right use in the organization. It's not just because we have a new technology, we want to be able to use the technology, but are we putting this technology to the right use, and are we able to give this technology to the right hands, and are we able to make use of it with regards to improving our experiences or experiences for the consumers. So that's another aspect to be evaluated, right? There's always a vision whenever there is a new technology. Hey, there's a new technology, I want to use the technology and I want to be able to deliver some value out of it. But is this the right thing to do at this time? And do we have the expertise, the skill set, the talent, and also the infrastructure available to deliver the solution in the right way?
If I may jump in, actually, I'd love to hear also from Jennifer on the same question of like looking from sort of start conception to delivery, if we will, of an AI product or tool. What needs to happen?
So in my experience, it's all about trade-offs, right? And so anyone here who's ever built, a data science or AI models knows that you have to set certain thresholds, right? Like your credit card fraud detection, you're setting those thresholds and trying to maximize or optimize. And so when we look at, for example, data privacy, right? There's some actually research that came out from Stanford High, the Human Centered AI Center, that talks about how the privacy acts of like the 1970s have made it now that made it such that we can't test for bias like we want to, right? So earlier it was brought up the Biden order to check for racial fairness within the federal organizations, and 21 out of the 25 came back and said they couldn't test for it because they had been explicitly excluding that information. And so it's a trade-off between, do you want to include sensitive data so that way you try to prevent bias, or do you want to exclude it so that way you want to not try to create it? And so you got to find kind of that right balance. And I think that trade-off applies in a number of other areas. For example, we look at like ChatGPT or other models like that, right? These models that are trained on the internet that are based on a lot of conflicting information are really good general purpose models, right? Like grocery lists, treasure hunts, poems, whatever you want, right? But obviously not very good at math. But then you can kind of go down a level and get more towards domain specificity or to proprietary information if you want to do like transfer learning. So for example, like Bloomberg GPT is really good at not hallucinating because it's trained on the curated Bloomberg data, but it's also based on the Bloom open source model. And then you can go a layer down, which is, okay, we want to use completely proprietary information. We don't have, there isn't anything to use on this, or any open source model that really speaks to the domain and the purpose and the intent of this model. And then you can just kind of build from yourself. So I feel like it's kind of a constant tug and pull. And one of the other things is really, when you talk about responsibility, what about to the environment, right? Like if anyone here hasn't read the paper on stochastic parrots and can language models be too large, I'd highly recommend it because when you look at, and I have notes here because I obviously brought numbers. When you look at like the average human, they can produce 4 tons of carbon emissions every year. The average American produces 16. So we're not doing great. But when you look at 2020, when ChatGPT was trained, it used 502 tons of carbon emissions. 2022, and it got bigger, it was 552 tons of carbon emissions. And then when you look at just operating the model, it's about 8 tons a day or 3,066 tons a year. So as exciting as these large language models are, the question is, if we're very serious about being responsible stewards of our planet, how big should these models be and how often should they be retrained?
Please.
Yeah, those were great responses. I love the carbon footprint. That's something that's near and dear to our heart as an electric utility. That's something that we're very, very much invested in, is how do we get to a net zero world. At the same time, we have people calling us up on a weekly basis wanting to know they can put their data centers in our service territory for the eventual future where the process and compute is just enormous. I'll take maybe an internal approach because I think, if you look at the two potential groups that are involved here, it's your customers, but then it's also your employees, right? There's a lot of stuff written on how you can take out $1 billion in your workforce if you just put ChatGPT to work. And it does all come down to data, and no promise is going to be delivered unless you have that curated data. And it's kind of ironic because if you think about generative AI, the value is that it can go after so much data and get results, but you really do need to draw boundaries around what data it can and can't access. And then the other thing is, and I'll just speak internal, we've done a lot of use cases at Duke on the image recognition side. So think about flying drones over hundreds of acres of solar farms just to find that one that 1 square inch where we have a problem versus people going through those images over and over again. And you can naturally see where that would go to, from a work order prioritization to a workflow, et cetera, et cetera. But internally, what we've had to do really, really carefully is do this thing called people in the loop. So, there's no uncontrolled AI that's just making a recommendation and it doesn't get checked. You have to have people eyeballing things to make sure that the results are correct and they're actionable. And so that's a big thing we do. I'd just say one more thing from a pure data standpoint. We've had a data governance committee in place for almost 20 years at Duke. We've been very focused on our data and the value it can deliver, even back when it was just reporting value. It had nothing to do about predictive analytics. And that is something that the business units across the company bring relatively senior level leaders in to sit at the table and make decisions about how we're going to organize, govern, and use our data. And that drives two things. One, it drives your data quality, which is the core of what we need here. But it also makes sure that we're evaluating risk along the way. And maybe even upfront. So if we want to do a use case that involves artificial intelligence, we'll tap that data owner, that data sponsor, and make sure we're taking the right things into consideration so we don't get into trouble down the road. Maybe finally, we're a regulated entity, and as a regulated entity, we have to take levels of precaution that I think a lot of consumer-based companies do not. And so governance in general is kind of something we've fallen in love with over the years, and and we apply it to everything, like it or not. Thank you.
I'm curious about this trade-offs piece that was raised, right? That there are, a variety of, where in different aspects of this question, there are a number of trade-offs that have to be considered. Taking into consideration, for instance, when you mentioned on how much sensitive data is being collected or used in a model versus then the ability to mitigate or account for bias in the model that might be present or in the data set by taking advantage of that sensitive data. I guess on that question or other trade-offs that are present, how should, obviously every organization is going to have a different landing point on those, but how can an organization go about deciding what the best landing point for them is, ensuring that they will be adhering to regulatory requirements, that they will be meeting their own internal standards, that they will be still delivering a high quality model or product, right? Like how can an organization go about finding that balance point, ensuring that the model will be responsible and operating ethically while managing all of those different considerations and trade-offs in practice?
Yeah.
The shelf life of models, to be honest, has certain tenure, right? Beyond that tenure, models can go stale. That's very normal with traditional AI models. Gen AI models are no exceptions, right? The more data that we use to train the model, and we keep adding data to train the models constantly, at one point it can forget data that it was trained on earlier, right? So you just have to be very specific about, does it even make sense for me to look at this data, train the model? You got to have some context. I think I heard somebody talking about context early in our conversation today. So there has to be context to data that we want to train the model on. Just because data is available, vast amount of data is available, it would not be optimal to train models on huge volume of data. Is that data is even going to be useful for me to train this model on? And how can I even optimize the data set that I am feeding as input to this model when I train this model is one of the criteria to look at. Because at one point, LLMs would not be working the way it would be trained initially, because it had certain data set, and then it got retrained on new data set, and vast volume of data keeps getting added, and that is not going to be optimal. So there's also a concept called forgetting or catastrophic forgetting in neural networks, right? So this is also common with LLMs. The more data that you add and keep adding more and more, models tend to forget. There aren't a lot of ways to control this except narrowing the data set that you would like to use to get the desired outcome. That's one thing that I've observed commonly.
And actually, I do want to say, I don't want to focus too much on LLMs. I know Gen AI is very hot button right now, but I think the theme of the panel and I appreciate your input, by the way, but the theme of the panel and the question, I think, should be applied to all types of AI models and systems.
Yeah, this catastrophic forgetting is
Yeah.
very common with traditional AI as well, not necessarily very specific to Gen AI.
And I think one of the areas you see trade-offs happening is also in the government as well, right? So was it July 23rd, the SEC released proposed rules for for governing basically broker-dealers and financial advisors when it comes to the use of AI. And one of the trade-offs they made in those proposed rules was to go from historically disclosure and informed consent were good enough, and then the new rules are proposing and said you have to monitor, this needs to become part of your data governance, you have to eliminate it, and only that it needs to be explainable, which basically takes any deep learning model out of the running. Or, well, at the same time, FINRA did the opposite, and they implemented a deep learning model for their market manipulation surveillance program, right? So I think even the government's like, how do we trade off between these? And the SEC proposed rules, they would apply to like almost all communications with clients. They would apply to even spreadsheets. And so, then how do you trade off between, what are you going to allow companies or organizations to self-govern versus what's the government going to take, responsibility for. And I think it's interesting when you look at like the DoD, they have like DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, who is basically the service provider for the DoD, has this approved products list. And so you have to take your products through for a couple of years. So the question is, will it be that the government, the SEC will want, financial organizations to self-govern? Will that be trustworthy enough? Or will it be, okay, you need to have audits? Or will it be maybe relying on third parties that are approved by the DoD? And I think one thing that was really interesting is that a handful of folks who spun out of OpenAI and they started Anthropic, and this idea of constitutional AI, and the idea is to have AI to supervise other AI. And you brought up, reinforcement learning and people labeling the data. And one of their concerns was that, okay, we're not going to be able to scale this, right? Like, we're not going to be able to scale the harm that these AIs could cause, and we've seen those over and over again. So rather have an AI assistant that's job basically is just to almost kind of like be a nanny and help find that out and help try to prod it, and so that way you're seeing that at scale. So would it be that maybe in the future we'd all have some kind of form of a constitutional AI, or how, like, basically what is the future of data governance going to look like? And I don't know what that looks like. I have a lot of questions.
So Richard, I would love if you feel you're able, if you could ground this a little bit in, again, the like practical steps that an organization or a data leader can take to find this balance point among all the considerations we've been talking about, and or how you might go about that yourself, right? If you can't speak on behalf of.
Yeah. I was chuckling earlier because we're using terms like traditional AI. I just think that's kind of ironic. So first off, when it comes to regulatories and policy, there is no trade-off for us. We see Mark over there, he knows if it's regulatory required, we do it, no matter what our cost situation is. Cost is something you need to consider. Like, everybody's talking about the benefits of AI, and it is not going to be cheap. The people that are selling AI, or especially generative AI, they know the value, and they're going to price it according to the value. And so you have to consider that. But it comes down to, when I mentioned the data governance committee earlier, it comes down to not just having that governing body, but the fact that it's cross-business unit. This is something that your whole company needs to lean into. And, I sit in our information technology group, and we're leading the way, but not leading the way as, look at this new shiny hammer we've got, do you have any nails? It's more of, hey, this is what it is. The first phone call we made was to our Chief Information Security Officer. The second phone call we made when we heard about this was to our legal counsel. And we've got a plan, but you need to recognize the risks. And then, if you get the organization to bring you the ideas, right, then you'll have buy-in from the get-go, and that will help you kind of set those guardrails and establish those those guardrails early on. Otherwise, what you do have is you've not managed expectations, and you have, just read any publication right now on the value of AI. That's what senior leaders are reading. They're not reading about all the risks and the scary stuff. They're reading about how much money you can take out of their business and how it can advance their position with their customers and how they can be the leader. And that's what you have to temper, is that enthusiasm. But again, get them involved on the front end, and you can do that successfully.
So I think we have time for 1 to 2 questions probably. So I'd love to turn to the audience. Sure. That was the first hand I saw. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ram Chidiboina from IBM. I lead the data AI and automation space. So I would like to expand on the comment that you made, Richard, regarding the data governance piece, where you said you've been within Duke practicing this data governance council for past 20 years. That's really interesting. I'd like you to expand on what was the initial efforts that went into getting your internal stakeholders buy-in into this council, because to form a data council and have a committee that's constantly changing and evolving needs a lot of time and effort. So, and the second part is, what would be your recommendations for organizations or leaders who are embarking upon this journey of forming a data council? What would be your 1 or 2 points that you want to recommend them to start with to get the buy-in from internal stakeholders?
Yeah, so good questions. we stood this up in the process of doing a big merger where we were having to consolidate a lot of back office systems and become, get two large companies operating as one. So like the conversation of data was ever present. And when you have your kind of CFO leading the way, it brings a lot of other business units along because they hold the pocketbook. But it does, you don't get everybody at the table at once. You get a business unit who brings another business unit, and then you evolve that over time. And I would tell you our data architecture, which I'm very proud of, and we're actually trying to figure out how to move to the next generation of it, it's not equal for every business unit. It's a function of who wanted to put the time on the front end to have the checks and balances to make sure their data is of quality and accessible. But I could, for every business unit we have that's great at that, I could list one more that's, their data is, you would not run any models against it without a year's worth of cleanup. So that's how I would say if I was going to start it over is, find a champion in the business that other business units respect and deliver for them at all costs. You've got to give them a success story and show them that it's valuable, and then they'll carry your flag.
So, and also identifying different roles and responsibilities within the organization is very vital, right? When we talk about governance, it's not one person who chairs data governance is governing the entire data across the organization, because data lifecycle is very complicated. Data flows right from your channels. It goes through core applications, and it goes into the lake, warehouse, and then finally it's used in BI reports, models. So a lot of hops where data navigates. You got to be able to identify data by domains, right? And then have ownership identified at all levels, right? Be it as a data owner, who are the data consumers, who are the stewards. So they need to be identified across each area so that they have a role to play in terms of governing the data. So if data quality is not good, it's not that one person monitoring the quality. It's like whoever is the owner should make sure that the quality of data is up to mark, right? So that's how you control data and data governance, manage data governance effectively across the organization. So everybody in the organization has a part to play in identifying champions or stakeholders or owners and consumers of data and bringing them aligned in the forum. Or having a data governance council with regular cadence to make sure that you can set up the policy standards, and having regular reviews with them would be very essential. I think it's a discipline than a set of tools, if you will. You have to build that discipline within the organization.
I think we have time for one more quick question. Yeah, and then we'll wrap up the session and go to our last one. Anyone else?
What's keeping you up at night right now about this?
About which this?
About balancing the usage of AI versus the potential downsides of it within your organization.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say optimizing for cost, right? So for example, one of the foundations you have to have is data modeling, right? You model your data well, it's only going to cost about 5 to 10% of a project's value, versus if you don't model it well and you've got stuff all over the place and it's a train wreck, it could cost 60 to 75% of a project's cost. And then there's also a really great paper out there, and actually I sent this to some finance people because I figured they probably weren't reading AI papers otherwise, but it used the chinchilla model, and it talked about, okay, if you, basically, here's how you optimize the number of parameters based on your budget. And so I think, for me, what keeps me up at night sometimes is just making sure that everybody's really well informed. And so what I spend a lot of time doing, and it sounds like Richard's done the same, is really understanding the use cases that the business leaders that I support have, finding the commonalities, building coalitions, and then what I've also had to, remind myself is if you can't build a council or coalition for something, you're probably going in the wrong direction. So the other part is just trying to stay up with the latest research. I mean, I know there's a tweet, I think it was like Allie Miller sent it out, and she's like, is anyone else in AI just freaking exhausted this week? Because it was like four new models came out, 6 new papers, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what am I missing? But I think that comes back down to what a number of folks have said that I wholeheartedly agree with, that you have to have a diverse team. You have to have a team that has different backgrounds, that has different biases, that has different ways of looking at the world. And I'm constantly learning from my team, and I'd like to think occasionally they learn from me, so that helps me eventually fall asleep.
So I think with that, we'll wrap up this panel. I want to thank you all again, Mina, Jennifer, and Richard, for your time and for your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to wrap up our session today, we have one final closing debate, after which we'll turn to drinks and networking. So this is going to be the same format as the debate we had just before the break. So similarly, the prompt in this case, as you can see, is this house believes AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. This could mean different things to different people, obviously. But I'm going to give, again, in the same format, give everyone 15 to 20 seconds to stew over it, decide if you agree or disagree with this prompt. I understand some of you then may want to push back against the prompt itself. That's helpful. It's great. But to start, we're going to take a quick vote on whether you agree or disagree that AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. So, okay. So a show of hands, please, for everyone who believes that AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. So if you're raising your hand, you think that it cannot be trusted to make decisions. If your hand is down, you think that it can be trusted to make decisions, is hand down. Okay, I'm seeing a smattering, but a minority in this case. So we're not as even, but I'm seeing there's another little consensus here between these two tables, and then around the back there. Yeah. I'd like to hear someone, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, in the green shirt, I don't know your name. I don't believe we heard from you in the last debate, though. So I'd love to start with you, to hear what you have to say, and then we'll open it to the room. But let's start here. And this is going to be someone who agrees with the prompt, correct?
No, I'm in between. So what I mean to say is, it all depends on.
Okay.
Can I trust? I can trust if I know what basis the AI model has been taken into considerations. But if I don't know, then I cannot trust it. Because as a decision maker, I need to know what are the points, what are the rationals, what are the decisions, guidelines that have been followed. And based on that, I believe with AI. I have been in data space for almost 25 years. I have built predictive models. But again, I know what decisions what rationals I have taken into consideration. And that gave me the confidence of believing in the models or not. That's my opinion, and that's still I'm holding on to it.
Okay, so it's sort of a caveated opinion, splitting the difference. Okay, does anyone feel strongly one way or the other? I saw two hands go immediately up at this back table, who I know have been chatting.
I would say you cannot trust it to make all decisions, and would add today. I think 5 years from now, I think they're gonna make a lot more decisions than they make today. But like today, I'll give it the easy decisions to make, but the difficult ones, you'll keep yourself.
Do you mind explaining why you think that's the case? That 5 years from now, I don't mean to push, but what you think will be different five years from now versus today? You said about 5 years.
So
in terms of important decisions.
Yeah, so I've been in technology for the last 25 years, and like any new technology, it's full of bugs. I mean, plenty of bugs that you don't really discover in the first few years. And AI has its own bugs, and in a few years from now, you'll have less meaningful bugs, and eventually it's going to become way better than anything else. You take self-driving cars, things like this. It's a natural evolution of any big change, I would say.
Okay. I trust human intelligence than artificial intelligence. Just kidding. It's humans who introduce artificial intelligence. So as long as we are able to train AI models in a way that it can make the right decisions, I trust AI. But human intelligence is amazing, and nothing can beat human intelligence. The other point that I think that where AI fails, we talked a lot about bias, we talked about responsible AI, ethical fairness. So that's where I think AI cannot be trusted unless until you have the right intelligence built in.
Thank you. So I indicated over here before, I saw you taking notes, so I'm going to let you get in first, and then I want to turn back. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember your
All
name.
right. Again, my name is Dror from the manufacturing industry. I'll just give a specific example, short and to the point. The reason it cannot be trusted yet is the quality of data. So we need to understand that the quality of data and what we put in there, and I'll give a specific example, is the basis for the decision it will make. And as long as there are people in our companies that are putting in this data and it might not be accurate, where we have a huge problem. For example, we have a system that counts raw materials. You know what you manufacture. You need 5 grams of A, B, C, D. When we're out, make an order. What we saw last year is somehow our inventory grew by $4 million. Nobody understood why. Because the data they put in from the bill of materials to what we were using was inaccurate. No one checked it. Everyone trusted the automation, the AI, and what you got is a warehouse filled to the brim with materials that we now don't need and have a lot of problems with. So again, the quality of data is a huge issue, and you still need a pair of human eyes to go over it.
So Andy Groman with IBM. So again, cannot be trusted to make decisions today. I think that's the key word. And trust, just like in human relationships, is built over time. Takes a long time to build trust, right? Can be destroyed very quickly. Even internally in IBM, we use a lot of AI now within our HR, and it was all over the press a couple months ago, where we made a big shift within HR to adopt AI chatbots. For me too, as a leader, I engage with this thing all the time. But even when we rolled that out, we very explicitly said, the bot's not making the decision. The human makes the decision. The bot is informing the manager of whatever decision needs to be made there. Again, because you need to build that trust over time. You need to make sure your data is accurate. And so I think you mentioned, or you mentioned a minute ago, over time, we will have that trust in the system. We will learn the ways to validate the data that went into it to ensure that you have that governance on the source that's driving that decision. But today is not that day. We're not there yet.
So I'm going to actually jump. I've avoided doing too much editorializing. I'm going to jump in briefly myself just because I saw that there was still a minority in agreement. So I'm, to be honest, not quite sure where I land, but I will say something that is related, I think, to those points, but that also gives me pause, is the idea that even if the distributions of our data, we could say, reflect real life, there could still be inherent biases in those that reflect cultural biases, that reflect misinformation themselves that are present that can't be accounted for, right? And so, I think I brought this example up at a previous session a couple weeks ago, but Viking helmets never had horns, right? It's a sort of small, it's not an important thing. Think about it, you can generalize this to more important issues, but if you go into ChatGPT-4 and you type in, show me a picture of a Viking, you're gonna get a photo of a hairy white person with horns, right, with a helmet with horns. And it's not a big deal in that case, but it still is a form of misinformation. And again, all of the data that's being pulled in that model is reflective of the broader cultural understanding, but still incorrect. And so I think that there are important issues also to be mitigated, not only about the quality of the data in the models, is it right or wrong, or like is the data reflecting the distributions of the data that are out there in the world, but also is the data there in the world biased itself or incorrect in certain ways that should give us pause about whether we can trust AI to make decisions in the same way that we might have, take a moment of pause before we trust certain people we know in the world to make decisions, right? You wouldn't trust your neighbor necessarily to make a decision for you to buy to pick the house you're going to buy. So why should you necessarily trust AI? And it's not a perfect one-to-one analog, but I think it applies a little bit. So again, I'm just jumping in mostly because there was a minority here, and so I'm trying to, I don't quite know where I land, but I'm going to push a little bit. But there's been a lot of airtime, obviously, now for the people who agree with this prompt. So I would love to hear from someone who feels pretty strongly that they disagree, and so that AI can be trusted to make decisions. Sure. Yeah. And actually, sorry, just for the mic, yeah.
Thank you. So I work in a branch of what I would consider AI that's very old. It's been around a long time. It's optimization or operations research. And I have seen customers that I originally sold in the 2000s, mid-2000s, that are still using these optimization-based systems to make production planning and scheduling decisions, to do product layout decisions, to do workforce planning, workforce scheduling, in the manufacturing production planning, production scheduling. Now, okay, these systems do have a human sitting in front of it, and the system will automatically create a plan, and yeah, a human can go and play with it and validate it. So maybe you could call it AI is being used to support decisions, but I think AI has been used and trusted for many use cases. A different example I worked in another industry is, it's very common and widely accepted, is on the marketing side. Response modeling, figuring out who gets what offer. People are very comfortable using machine learning models to decide who gets which offer and feel pretty comfortable with it. So, some of the new stuff, yeah, it's going to take a little while, but I think it can absolutely be trusted. Oh, yes.
In another real-world example, if you think about an ED physician, so an emergency department physician, one of their primary and most important jobs is to triage the people who come in to try to figure out who gets the priority, who needs treatment right away. We use AI with computer vision for patients who come into the ED with symptoms of stroke or brain bleed, and it automatically orders the surgeon, the nursing staff, preps the OR, and you know what? If it's wrong, that's okay, but that person has saved hundreds of thousands of brain cells, because in these cases, seconds matter, right? So I believe that AI can be trusted to make decisions. All decisions, no. Some decisions, yes.
Let's go one and then two over here, because I think we're going to get, is this an against or a for?
I'm sorry, Jenny, I'm going to have to counter that. Yes. So I'm sitting with a 4-star general, and I'm asking him some questions about AI, and he's been working with it for like 4 years. And he's like, we have the capability for it to make the decision to drop bombs and destroy things. We don't let it make that decision. We trust what it tells us, but at the end of the day, we want humans to make the call. It's for the opposite reason that Jenny's saying. It's the importance of human life, and saving it is more important that we get it wrong if we get it wrong than the computer. So it depends, I think, on what decisions are being made as to whether you trust it or not, and then all the other things like data and how good it's been trained and how well it performs, all of that comes into play. But just wanted to give the other side because I've heard it.
Yeah, it's exactly where my mind was going. The high-level decisions that a person has to own the accountability for, right? And I think the nuance that you brought out is, okay, a human could decide to delegate that authority in the case where the downside much outweighs the upside, right? And that's kind of what you were articulating. So I think it's, again, that judgment call goes back to the human. The human is delegating the decision to the model because that's the best, that's going to give the best outcomes, right? Thank you.
So I've heard from both sides of the debate now. It seems like everyone is we're all convening on this idea that the human in the loop is important, whether you agree or disagree with the prompt. So is there anyone here who feels strongly that there are, let's say, important use cases where the human should not be in the loop actively, right? Where you want the human excluded from the loop, okay? I see a hand immediately over here, so.
So firstly, I'm going to agree with Jenny about that AI can be trusted sometimes and can't be trusted other times, that it's very much situational dependent. But I wanted to bring up a use case that I think it's interesting from Microsoft, and that's recently, they're launching their Copilot, which is a generative AI, and what they've said was that if that leads to any copyright infringement, that they will completely cover the costs for any of their customers. And so I think it's an interesting, I think that was probably really smart business decision to not have a human in the loop, because you can't do that at scale if it's like, 1 million people have Copilot running at a certain time, but also it's kind of a low risk, right? So again, it's a trade-off.
I think I'd like to hear from, if there's anyone who strongly believes AI can be trusted. I know we got 2 opinions over here, but I would like one more from the can be trusted side before we move on and then start to wrap up. Sure.
I have a use case where we build a model for renewals of the policies of the customers. And initial stages, what we saw, we built an AI model. The people were not ready to trust it. But eventually, as the maturity happened, the adjusters who write the renewal policies started trusting it. And one thing that we saw is the 90% of the adjusters were not even looking at the policy's renewal in a 1-year time, and they were trusting the model. So it all goes on to again saying that once the confidence levels is there, the AI can be trusted, but that maturity has to be there, that data point has to be given. So that's where I think everyone is leaning towards, yes, it can be trusted, but from 0 to 90 in a 1-year time, it's a big win, correct? So 90% of your time is getting freed up. Do you want to push it to 100%? No, because there might be some cases where you want to look into it, look into the decisioning part. So I think it all, coming back to my same point, is it all depends on the use cases, maturity, confidence.
I'm curious actually, if the prompt were this house believes machine learning cannot be trusted to make decisions, right? I mean, would people feel differently about it? Yes, no? Like if we broaden it out, so we're talking about, I feel like, so we're talking about maybe tools that are more routinized at this point. Would that make a difference for anyone?
Hi, Crystal Johnson, IBM. I think we're kind of arguing against and for the same point, right? It's
Sure.
not that it cannot be trusted. And so, Marcus, in your example, the general did trust the data. He didn't rely solely on the data. He wanted to evoke some emotion into it and use that as a tool for measurement along with some other factors as well, right? So when you're looking at machine learning, historically, no, I don't think machine learning, we should rely on it just alone. In mortgage lending and credit scores, the bias, we know it exists, right? So why would we rely solely on historical data? You have to use all of these tools as a supplement, right? And I think that's the general answer to all of these. We don't want to rely solely on AI, and given all factors equal, if all of the data is clean and organized, we can look at the data and the AI or the machine learning and use it as a supplement. And how important the decision is how heavily that the factor is that we use it, right? So.
Yeah, I think we have time for probably 2 or 3 more. So I think 1, 2, and then if there's a last 1 or 2 after, we'll have time for that, and then a final vote. But so please go ahead.
So I'll add one more thing that I noticed. So it's like we have 2 very extreme cases here that you have to use AI. So for example, Jenny, example of life or death, in a short term, you're going to have to take the chance here because no doctor will be able to do the same thing in a split of a second or in a very short period of time. On our end, like I said, we are on the transportation side. We are willing to bet ourselves on AI when the mistake is not going to kill anyone, let's say, okay? So if our system decides that this is the right route for those trucks, and they're going to be there at between 4 and 6, and we got them between 4:15 and 6:15, that's not a big deal. No one's going to die. So I think you have the least risky one, which is, okay, no one's going to die. And the funny thing, the other extreme is like someone's going to die if you're not going to use it. And like those is in a funny way, those will be very acceptable by AI. Everything in the middle is the one people have a hard time.
Is the AI just general AI or is it generative AI? There's a difference.
Sure. Do you want to walk through how, what you feel that difference means for you for the prompt?
Yes. So if you're doing AI and you are using something like the BERT model to score the probability, then you've got something you can work with and say, based on this, I've got an 80% probability or a chance. If, however, I'm using generative AI and I do not know my data sources, then that's a different game altogether.
And then anyone who has a burning final thought, you don't need to, but before we take a vote and then wrap up. Go for it.
Not really for discussion, but something to just think about. Change the word AI to human.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Okay, so I think we'll take one final vote, see if anyone's minds have been changed either way, and then we'll wrap up. So by a show of hands, if you agree with the prompt still or have been convinced that you believe AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. So again, if you're raising your hand, you think that it cannot be trusted to make decisions, who agrees with the prompt? So about the same people, although I think there was one or two somewhere over there who raised their hands who haven't now. So, okay. And everyone else, I recognize that there's some middle ground also. We've heard lots about human in the loop, human decision making paired with AI, but it seems like everyone else believes that AI can be trusted to some extent, or trusted with people, or trusted in certain situations at the very least. With that, actually, this is the conclusion of our day. So it says here, please join us for a networking reception. There'll be drinks as well, and I believe some snacks. Please also, if you have a moment and are able to use your phone to scan for an event survey, it's helpful feedback for our team about how you found the day and the events. I want to thank IBM again for sponsoring this event and for hosting us all here today. Thank you. And I want to thank all of our panelists one more time. And finally, I hope that everyone took something valuable from the day. I know that I did. And there's clearly a lot to learn about, and a lot to think through with regards to a strategy-oriented, product-oriented, responsibility-first mindset. And I hope that everyone here got something out of the sessions and has a great rest of your evening. So thank you again for being here with us today, and see you all later.